The day I cleaned out my desk after 18 years of loyal service, I felt something strange settle over me, not anger, but an icy determination. Little Tiffany Reid with her Harvard degree and Daddy's last name had no idea what she just unleashed, or that the fine print in my contract was about to become her worst nightmare. I grew up in Indianapolis East Side, not the nice part with trimmed hedges, but where men came home with grease-stained hands and tired eyes. My father walked out when I was 8, leaving Mom to raise 3 boys on a secretary's salary. I still remember her at the kitchen table, lips moving silently as she calculated which bills could wait another week. That's where I learned what survival looked like. By 16, I was working after school at Wilson's Auto, learning that machines, unlike people, always made sense. If something broke, you found the problem and fixed it. Simple. Honest. No excuses. When I met Sarah during my second year at Purdue, she saw something in me worth betting on. Marcus, she'd say, you've got good hands and a better heart. 29 years of marriage proved her right. We built a life in a modest 3-bedroom where we raised our kids, Emily and Jason. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. When Richard Bentley first approached me about joining his company, I wasn't looking to leave my supervisor position at Continental Manufacturing. But Richard wasn't like other business owners I'd met. He'd show up on the production floor at 6 a.m. in work boots, not afraid to get his hands dirty. I need someone who understands that quality isn't just a word in a mission statement, he told me. It's what you do when nobody's watching. For 18 years, I lived by that code. I knew every machine on that floor, could diagnose problems by sound alone. The younger guys called it the Wilson whisper, how I'd place my palm against a hydraulic press and know exactly what was wrong. I built my team carefully, people who took pride in their work. Paul Thompson, our chief engineer, brilliant mind, terrible at office politics. Nancy Fitzgerald, in quality control toughest inspector in the state, rejected shipments that were 1,000th of an inch off spec. We weren't just colleagues, we were guardians of something that mattered. My office wasn't much, just a glass-walled corner with visibility to the production floor. The walls were covered with production charts, safety records, and photos of company picnics. My proudest achievement wasn't the plaques or certificates, but the 184 consecutive days without a lost time accident. That was real. That was something you could touch. In the evenings, I'd come home to Sarah, who fought her cancer with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. Even in her final days, she worried more about me than herself. Promise me you'll keep going, she whispered one night, her hand light as air in mine. The company needs you. After she passed, work became my anchor. Richard understood, giving me space to grieve but keeping me busy enough to survive it. When Richard's heart problem started, he began preparing for succession. We'd have long talks in his office overlooking the city. Marcus, he said once, this place isn't just about making parts, it's about making a difference in people's life, giving them dignity, purpose, a future. I believed him because I'd lived it. When he mentioned his daughter might take over someday, I nodded supportively, though I'd only met Tiffany at company Christmas parties, where she seemed more interested in her phone than conversation. She's young, Richard assured me, but she's smart, Harvard Business School, she just needs the right guidance. His eyes had met mine meaningfully. Your guidance. I should have seen the warning signs when Tiffany started bringing in consultants who talked about streamlining legacy operations and optimizing human capital deployment. But loyalty to Richard kept me silent, even as I watched her eyeing the older stuff like outdated equipment ready for replacement. If I'd known then what I know now, maybe I would have fought harder. Maybe I would have prepared better. But after nearly 2 decades of building something that mattered, I never imagined it could be dismantled so easily by someone who saw only numbers on a spreadsheet, not the lives behind them. The air in the conference room felt different that Tuesday morning. Too still. Like the factory floor right before a machine fails catastrophically. I'd been in this business long enough to sense trouble before it announced itself. Tiffany sat at the head of Richard's old mahogany table, her manicured fingers tapping an impatient rhythm against her leather portfolio. Gone was her father's tradition of morning production meetings at the floor tables, where you could hear the machines breathing life into the building. Instead, we were summoned to the executive suite like schoolchildren to the principal's office. As you know, we're implementing a strategic restructuring to optimize our operational efficiency, she announced, her Harvard Business School vocabulary a stark contrast to her father's plain-spoken wisdom. Her eyes never quite meeting mine. We've identified redundancies in our legacy management structure. Paul Thompson shifted uncomfortably beside me, exchanging a glance that confirmed we were thinking the same thing. We'd seen 3 rounds of restructuring in the last 2 months. Each time, it was the veterans who disappeared. People who remembered Richard's handshake promises. People who knew what quality meant before it became a buzzword in corporate presentations. Marcus, Tiffany said, finally looking at me with practiced sympathy that never reached her eyes. You've been with Bentley for quite some time. 18 years, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Started when your father expanded the hydraulics division. A flash of annoyance crossed her face. She hated when anyone mentioned her father's achievements. Yes, Well, the business landscape has evolved significantly since then. We need agile leadership aligned with contemporary market paradigms. I nearly laughed. The business landscape hadn't changed at all. People still needed quality parts delivered on time. Machines still broke down in the same ways. What had changed was who was calling the shots and what they valued. The board has approved my recommendation for immediate leadership realignment, she continued. We'll be consolidating operations under Jake Mercer from now on. Jake Mercer, 29 years old, 6 months with the company. His expertise was in spreadsheets, not machinery. But he nodded along, unable to look me in the eye. I don't understand, I said, though I understood perfectly. The Southern contract is coming up for renewal next month. We've got the Miller project deadlines, the new press installation. Jake has been fully briefed on all ongoing projects, Tiffany cut in. HR has prepared your separation package. They are waiting for you now. Just like that. 18 years ended in 40 seconds. I sat motionless, feeling the weight of every late night I'd spent fine-tuning production schedules. Every weekend I'd come in when a machine went down. Every Christmas bonus I'd fought to preserve for the 4 workers when accounting wanted to cut costs. You can't do this, Paul said, his voice tight with anger. Marcus knows this operation better than anyone. He built half the systems we use. Tiffany's smile tightened. I appreciate your input, Paul, but these decisions aren't up for discussion. She glanced at her watch. Nancy Fitzgerald will be joining us at 11 to discuss quality control restructuring. I suggest you take the opportunity to consider your own position within our new organizational vision. So that was it. The old guard was being systematically eliminated. First me, then Paul, then Nancy. Anyone who remembered how things were done before profit trumped people. As if reading my thoughts, Tiffany added, the market doesn't pay for sentiment, Marcus, it pays for results. I thought of Richard, lying in his hospital bed after his second heart attack, gripping my hand. Take care of my people, Marcus, they are what makes this place special. I'd promised him I would. A promise I was now powerless to keep. 2 security guards waited outside the conference room. Company policy for terminated employees, they explained apologetically. Men I'd hired years ago, now escorting me to clear out my office like I was some kind of threat. Word spread quickly. As I packed my family photos and engineering manuals into a cardboard box, I noticed 4 workers finding excuses to walk past my glass-walled office. Some nodded respectfully. Others couldn't meet my gaze. 18 years of trust and loyalty reduced to awkward glances and silent solidarity. When I reached my truck in the parking lot, I sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the windshield, I could see the factory where I'd spent more waking hours than in my own home. Where I'd found purpose after Sarah died. Where I thought I'd work until retirement. My phone buzzed. A text from Paul. Tiffany, just let Nancy go to. We need to talk. Miller's pub at 7. As I started the engine, a strange calm settled over me. Tiffany might have Harvard credentials and her father's name, but there was something she didn't know. Something Richard had insisted on in my contract years ago when larger companies tried to poach me. 2-year severance if terminated without cause, Richard had said. Because loyalty should go both ways. I smiled for the first time that day. Tiffany was about to learn an expensive lesson about burning bridges in a town where everybody knows everybody, and about underestimating a man with nothing left to lose. I walked into the meeting room that Friday morning with my heart pounding against my ribs like a hammer on steel. 3 days since Tiffany had thrown me out like yesterday's trash. 3 days of sleepless nights and rage that burned so hot it left me feeling hollow. Tiffany sat across the polished conference table, a silk blouse probably worth more than my severance was supposed to be. Beside her, a sharp-dressed attorney I'd never seen before, all slicked back hair and predatory confidence. The kind of lawyer who charges by the breath. Let's make this quick, Tiffany said, not bothering to look up from her phone. I have a budget meeting at 11. My attorney, Elliot Simmons, spread his documents methodically across the table. I had known Elliot for 15 years, coached his son in Little League. He wasn't flashy like Tiffany's corporate shark, but he knew contract law better than anyone in 3 counties. Miss Reid, Elliot began, his voice measured and calm. We're here to discuss the terms of Mr. Wilson's severance package as outlined in Section 4.7 of his employment agreement. Tiffany's lawyer leaned forward. Bentley Industrial has prepared a standard separation package of 3 months' salary, which is quite generous considering the circumstances. My blood pressure spiked so fast I could feel it behind my eyes. The circumstances? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Elliot placed a hand on my arm, a silent warning to let him handle this. He slid a document across the table, my contract, with Richard's signature at the bottom. The same contract I'd signed 18 years ago when Richard had promised me I'd always have a place at Bentley. Page 9. Paragraph 2, Elliot said. In the event of termination without documented cause, executive management personnel are entitled to 24 months of salary continuance. The color drained from Tiffany's face as her attorney snatched up the document. I felt a grim satisfaction watching the realization hit her. 2 years' salary. Nearly $320,000 she hadn't budgeted for. This is absurd, she snapped. My father would never agree to such terms. Your father insisted on them, I said, memories flooding back. The day Hartman tried to poach me to run their national plant, Richard said loyalty should run both ways. The lawyer whispered something in Tiffany's ear. She shook her head violently. We'll contest this, she said, her composure cracking. We can tie this up in court for years, then good luck finding another position at your age, Marcus. Who's going to hire a dinosaur when they can get someone with current skills for half the price? The words hit like a physical blow. She was right about one thing. At 59, my prospects were limited. But before I could respond, the conference room door swung open. Richard Bentley stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane. Thinner than I remembered, his skin pale against his dark suit, but his eyes still sharp as steel shavings. Dad, Tiffany gasped. You should be resting. What are you doing here? Richard ignored her, his gaze fixed on me. Marcus. He nodded slightly. Paul called me. You shouldn't be here, Richard, I said, genuine concern cutting through my anger. His second heart attack had nearly killed him 3 months ago. When my daughter starts dismantling everything I built, that's exactly where I should be. He moved slowly to the table, each step deliberate. The room fell silent except for the tap of his cane against the floor. This is my company now, Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You signed the papers. You wanted to retire. I wanted to rest, Richard corrected her. Not watch you get the place. He picked up my contract, scanning the page Elliot had indicated. A smile flickered across his face. I remember this. Hartman offering you that fancy title and stock options. You told me Bentley was family, I said quietly. That money wasn't everything. And you believed me. Richard nodded. Best decision I ever made. Tiffany slammed her palm against the table. This is ridiculous. We're not paying him $300,000 for doing nothing. We're paying him what we owe him, Richard said, his voice suddenly commanding the room despite its weakness. For 18 years of building this company while I was taking all the credit. You can't do this. Tiffany hissed. The board respects contracts, Richard cut her off. Something you might want to learn before you lose more than just good employees. He turned to Tiffany's attorney. Prepare the severance agreement as written in the contract. Full benefits continuation too. The room felt charged with electricity. In that moment, I saw something in Tiffany's eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of her father. A failing in front of him. Richard turned to leave, then paused beside my chair. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. I'm sorry, Marcus, he said quietly. This isn't what I wanted. As he walked out, leaning heavily on his cane, I felt something crack inside me, not from grief or anger, but possibility. For the first time since being escorted from my office, I saw a future beyond Bentley Industrial. Tiffany was watching her father go, her expression unreadable. When she turned back, her mask of corporate confidence had returned, but something had changed. Something fundamental. We'll have the paperwork ready by Monday, she said coldly. I stood up, gathering my copies of the contract. One more thing, Tiffany, I said, my voice steady. You mentioned the market not paying for sentiment. You were right about that. I leaned across the table, close enough to see her perfect makeup couldn't hide the circles under her eyes. But it does pay for experience, and that's something you can't fire. I never planned on cashing that check and just riding off into the sunset. No, the moment I walked out of that meeting room, my mind was already churning with possibilities. You see, while Tiffany had been busy firing anyone over 50, she missed something crucial about the Indianapolis manufacturing landscape. 3 days after that severance meeting, I was sitting across from Douglas Miller, owner of Precision Components. We'd been friendly competitors for years, occasionally meeting for beers at O'Malley's to grumble about material costs and labor shortages. They're selling off the hydraulics division. Douglas' ass is with a face creasing with disbelief. The custom work, that's Bentley's bread and butter. Tiffany says it's resource-intensive and low margin. I replied, mimicking her condescending tone. She wants to focus on standardized parts that can be mass-produced. Douglas shook his head, running a calloused hand through his silver hair. That's insane. Nobody does custom hydraulic systems better than Bentley. I leaned forward, lowering my voice, though we were alone in his cluttered office. She's liquidating millions in specialized equipment at bargain prices. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed as he studied me. And you know this how? Paul Thompson. She fired him 2 days after me. He's still got friends in accounting. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee. But that's not all. Nancy in quality control found something interesting before Tiffany showed her the door too. I slid my phone across the desk, displaying property records I'd been sent that morning. Tiffany's not building Daddy's legacy, she's stripping it for cash. 3 luxury condo purchases in Miami Beach in the last month alone. Douglas whistled low. Richard know about this. Richard is recovering from a second heart attack, thinking his baby girl is preserving his life's work. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. For a long moment, Douglas just stared at the phone. Then he looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" 2 weeks later, Cornerstone Precision was born. With my severance as seed money and Douglas's business connections, we secured financing to snap up Bentley's specialized equipment at fire sale prices. One by one, I reached out to the talent Tiffany had discarded or who were jumping ship from her sinking company. Paul brought his engineering expertise. Nancy implemented the quality control systems that had made Bentley legendary. Even the floor supervisors, men and women who'd spent decades perfecting their craft, found their way to our door. We moved fast, securing contracts with Bentley's abandoned custom clients before they could find other suppliers. Some signed with us the same day they received Tiffany's form letter announcing Bentley's strategic repositioning. I was inspecting our newly installed hydraulic press when my phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in months. Marcus. Richard's voice sounded older, frailer than I remembered. "We need to talk." The following day, I sat across from him in his home study, surrounded by photos and mementos from decades of business success. He looked diminished in his armchair, but his eyes were clear and alert. "You've been busy," he said, gesturing to a folder on his desk, a company prospectus. "Just applying what I learned from the best," I replied, unsure if I was facing an ally or an enemy. Richard sighed deeply. "Tiffany showed me the quarterly numbers yesterday, first time she's let me see them since." He trailed off, pain flickering across his face. "It's bad?" "It's worse than bad. She's gutting my company, Marcus." His voice cracked. "Everything I built, for what? Beachfront property and cocktail parties." I stayed silent, letting him process what he discovered. "I need your help," he finally said, looking me straight in the eyes. "To save what's left of my life's work." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man whose daughter had thrown me away like garbage was now asking for my assistance. But looking at Richard, this proud man reduced to asking for help, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked. Richard's smile was grim but determined. "Something that's going to make Tiffany very, very unhappy." 6 months after being fired, I stood in the polished conference room where my career had ended, now filled with Bentley's anxious board members. The air felt electric with tension as Richard took his place at the head of the table, looking stronger than I'd seen him in months. Tiffany sat beside him, scrolling through her phone with practiced nonchalance. "Before we begin," Richard announced, his voice steady, "I'd like to introduce Marcus Wilson, who many of you already know." Tiffany's head snapped up, her perfectly manicured fingers freezing mid-swipe. The color drained from her face as our eyes met. "What is he doing here?" she hissed. Richard ignored her, continuing with remarkable composure. "Today's meeting has one agenda item. The board will be voting on a proposed merger between Bentley Industrial and Cornerstone Precision." The room erupted into murmurs. Tiffany slammed her portfolio onto the table. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "We don't need to merge with some garage operation started by a disgruntled ex-employee." Richard slid a document across the polished mahogany. "Cornerstone now controls 60% of the custom hydraulics market that he abandoned. They've hired 27 of our former employees and secured contracts with 15 of our biggest former clients." Her eyes darted across the numbers, widening with each page turn. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes. "It doesn't matter," she finally said, her voice brittle with false confidence. "I hold majority ownership. This merger isn't happening." Richard's smile was small but devastating. "Actually, sweetheart, I maintain 51% controlling interest, the detail buried in the paperwork you were too busy to read thoroughly." The blood drained from her face. "You wouldn't." "I have already voted for the merger," he said, each word landing like a hammer. "And as of this morning, Paul Thompson will assume leadership of all remaining divisions at Bentley." Tiffany's hands were shaking as she stared at the merger documents. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I leaned forward, keeping my voice level. "This is business, Tiffany, nothing personal." Her own words thrown back at her like a boomerang. 3 weeks later, I walked the factory floor of our newly expanded facility. The old Bentley hydraulic presses hummed alongside our newer equipment. Nancy moved between workstations with her clipboard, occasionally stopping to point something out to a younger quality inspector, teaching, not criticizing. Richard joined me by the main assembly line, moving more easily now than he had in months. "The doctor says my blood pressure's down 20 points, he said, watching a team install a custom system for an aerospace client. "Funny how that works." "Stress is a killer," I agreed. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened with Tiffany," he said, his voice dropping. "Where I went wrong." I waited, sensing he needed to talk. I wanted to give her everything I never had growing up, but I forgot to teach her the most important lessons that people aren't disposable and experience has value. What's she doing now? I asked, genuinely curious. Richard sighed. She took her settlement and moved to Miami, starting some kind of app company. He shook his head. Maybe failing will teach her what I couldn't. At that moment, Paul approached with a stack of design sketches, eager to show us a new innovation. Beyond him, I could see the factory floor bustling with activity grey-haired veterans working alongside 20-somethings, each learning from the other. Later that evening, I sat alone in my office, looking at an old photo of Sarah and me in front of Bentley Industrial, taken on my first day 18 years ago. I traced her smile with my finger. You wouldn't believe how things turned out, honey, I whispered. For the first time since her death, the memory didn't bring that sharp pain. Just a warm certainty that she would have been proud. I hadn't planned on building something new at 59. Hadn't expected to find purpose again after being discarded. Yet here I was, surrounded by people who valued what I knew, what I learned through decades of showing up and solving problems. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. Sometimes it's about creating something they can never take from you. And sometimes, when you're building instead of burning bridges, you discover that what you're really after isn't revenge at all. It's redemption. 1 year later, standing in our expanded facility, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. The anger that once fueled my every move had transformed into something more valuable purpose. I'd learned that experience isn't just about the years you put in. It's about the wisdom you gain when those years are filled with both triumphs and failures. It's about recognizing that sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage. Watching Richard reconnect with the business he'd built, seeing Paul and Nancy mentor younger staff who actually listened, it hit me that revenge wasn't what I'd been after all along. What I'd really wanted was validation. Not just for myself, but for every grey-haired worker pushed aside for being too expensive or out of touch. As the afternoon light streamed through the factory windows, highlighting decades of craftsmanship in motion, I felt Sarah's presence beside me. You built something that matters, her voice seemed to whisper in my heart. Something that will outlast all the Tiffany's of the world. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just my redemption story. It was ours.